Excellency and dear participants, Namaste and good afternoon. Welcome to our very special session on Nepal-Australia ties with Her Excellency Felicity Volk, Ambassador of Australia to Nepal, at this nice international conference on understanding Nepal's foreign policy. We are really honored by your kind presence. Excellency Felicity Volk is currently serving as an Ambassador of Australia to Nepal. She's a career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and was most recently director at new Colombo PlanSecretariat. She has previously served overseas in Vientiane and Dhaka. She holds a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Laws honors from University of Queensland. Excellency, let me once again welcome you to our international conference on understanding Nepal's foreign policy. Kindly make your remarks in around 20 minutes, which will be followed by a few questions and answers. Excellency, over to you. Thank you.
Namaste, and thank you so much, Dr. Jaswal. I'm really delighted to be here, and thank you very much to NICE for the invitation to join your conference. My warm greetings to all guests, and it's great to see that there's a real diversity of people who've joined today. As you've noted, I'm proposing to talk for around 20 to 25 minutes at most about the broad waterfront of Nepal-Australian relations over the past 61 years. I'm going to focus a little on our development partnership, and I'll make some general comments about Australia's growing engagement with South Asia more broadly. But to take us back to the start, on the 15th of February 1960, Australia and Nepal formalised our diplomatic partnership. Our countries were in very different places 61 years ago. In the 1960s, we were two distant countries in an era of propeller planes and snail mail. Government-to-government messages were delivered by diplomatic pouch over periods of months. For diplomats, at least, it was a more sedate and reflective time, a time before 24-hour news cycles, social media, and the Twitter sphere. During our 61 years of partnership, we have shared different journeys. For Australia, the 1960s were a precursor to significant economic and social reforms. The 1960s saw large-scale protests and campaigns for independence, for equality of women in the workplace, for fairer wages, a free accessible system of education, and the recognition of rights for our Indigenous Australians. In 1962, our Commonwealth Electoral Act was amended to finally allow Indigenous Australians the right to vote in federal elections. And in May of 1967, 90.8% of Australian voters chose yes in a national referendum to include Indigenous people in census counts. Australia continues to debate constitutional recognition of our Indigenous people, and there are ongoing calls for an inclusive Australia Day date that we can all celebrate. So I think Australia understands Nepal's challenges around inclusive development because we are still addressing those challenges ourselves. Similarly, we understand Nepal's challenges with immigration and citizenship. Australia is now a multicultural success story. It wasn't always the case. 75% of Australians identify with an ancestry other than Australian. 45% report at least one parent born overseas, and Australians come from over 200 birthplaces and speak over 200 languages, including Nepal and Nepali and a number of the other languages spoken here. So we understand too the challenges of establishing successful trade and investment platforms. Until reforms were introduced in Australia in the 1970s and carried on at a pace by successive governments of both political persuasions, Australia's policies were largely protectionist. Hard-fought economic reform, an issue on which Australia has enjoyed bipartisan support, means that we now enjoy an economy open to trade and investment upon which our uninterrupted prosperity has been based for almost 3 decades. Now, Nepal has been on its own transition journey, obviously, as you would all know very well, from a monarchy to democracy to a federalist system. The country has come through a terrible civil conflict and 15 years later is struggling to navigate a genuine transitional justice process. The arguments against Nepal opening up to free trade and foreign investment are not dissimilar to arguments in Australia in the 70s and 80s, and which still continue today. And despite a very progressive constitution, there remains work to do for Nepal to derive the full benefits of gender, disability and social inclusion. But now, after 61 years, Australia and Nepal enjoy a level of unprecedented connectivity and connection. Underpinning our warm bilateral relations are strong people-to-people links, which have generated shared cultural ties. More than 100,000 Nepalis are living in Australia. And even with the impacts of COVID, almost 40,000 Nepali students are studying at Australian universities. Roughly 10% of those have been online from Nepal since Australia's borders closed due to COVID. But I'm also delighted that this week our Prime Minister announced that our borders are reopening for international students from the 1st of December. Pre-COVID, more than 36,000 Australians visited Nepal each year. We're hoping that that will return once borders are more open. In Melbourne, we celebrate a Momo festival. In Australia, Nepali cricketers such as Sandeep Mamichan are carving out names for themselves in Australia's Big Bash League. In Nepal, institutional collaborations are advancing our mutual knowledge, and I hope that some of you may have even enjoyed some of the Australian wines that are available in Kathmandu. So globalisation and our very strong people-to-people and cultural links underpin our sense of connection, including our shared challenges. Australians have felt keenly the impact of natural disasters here in Nepal. Australia stood beside Nepal as it dealt with the devastating impact of the 2015 earthquake and then floods 2 years later. Similarly, Australia has appreciated the messages of sympathy and support in response to our devastating bushfires in 2020. These fires were more widespread and damaging than any other year, exacerbated by record-breaking temperatures combined with severe drought, strong winds and dry lightning storms. In total, more than 18 million hectares of bushland were burned across Australia, which is around 186,000 square kilometres. Around 2,800 homes were destroyed and 34 lives lost. More than 1 billion animals were killed, and the cost to our economy was estimated at 103 billion Australian dollars. So we understand well the impacts of natural disaster and climate change. And I've watched with concern the fires in Nepal soon after my arrival here in January of this year. And I've learned since my arrival of the terrible impacts of global warming on the Hindu Kush Himalayan glaciers, upon which 2 billion people depend. ICIMOD's HIMAP report, supported by Australian funding, delivered the scientific evidence base for a call to action. At current rates of global warming, we stand to lose 2/3 of these glaciers by the end of the century, 2/3 of an irreplaceable global resource. And this highlights the importance to us of linking science with policy and regional and global cooperation to address this very real threat. In both our countries, our exposure to natural disasters has spoken directly to the importance of global action on climate change. We share a common understanding of the imperative of addressing this, and in that regard, I applaud Nepal's new commitments at COP26 just a couple of weeks ago. Bilaterally, we have been working with Nepal to address the climate change threat. This includes successful mitigation efforts through our Sustainable Development Investment Program and also our support to Nepal's disaster risk reduction capacity through our Australia Awards short courses. But our partnership in the field of sustainable development and environmental protection dates back almost to the point when diplomatic relations were first established between our countries. In 1966, Australia began its support for Nepali Forestry, a program which became known as the Nepal-Australia Forestry Project in the 1970s and later the Community Forestry Project. By 2006, around 21,000 hectares of new community forests had been established in 2 different districts of Nepal. This work continues through the Enlift project, Enhanced Livelihood from the Improved Forest Management in Nepal. In 2020 to 21, Australia's multifaceted partnership with Nepal pivoted towards Nepal's COVID-19 response, with a focus on supporting health security, economic recovery and stability, with social inclusion mainstreamed across all programming. All the while, we are maintaining key pillars of our development relationship. In an average year, our aid investments in Nepal total around $21 million. It's a mix of direct bilateral programming, funding from regional programs to Nepal in areas such as sexual and reproductive health, water management and connectivity, and then also funding through multilateral bodies for projects such as public financial management, the pre-positioning of emergency supplies for disaster preparedness, and support for sexual and reproductive health services to marginalised women. Of course, 2020 and 2021 have not been average years, an indirect expression of the depth of our bilateral relationship. On May the 21st this year, our Foreign Minister announced an additional package of $7 million in emergency humanitarian support for Nepal's second wave COVID response. A couple of weeks later, a Royal Australian Air Force flight arrived with a donation of $1.8 million of PPE. All up, this represented around a 35% supplementation to our usual aid budget. And this is in addition, of course, to our provision of vaccine supply through the COVAX facility. Our COVID-19 humanitarian funding is supporting a total of almost 2 million beneficiaries across all provinces in Nepal in the key areas of health security, economic recovery and education support. But then what does a more typical year look like in our development partnership? Well, we're delivering education and capacity building through our Australia Awards Scholarships program, with another 20 scholarships awarded for programs in Australia to commence in 2022. We are supporting the implementation of Nepal's peace process and transition to federalism through our flagship subnational governance program, which is implemented through our very respected partner, the Asia Foundation. The SNGP, as this program is known, reflects Australia's interests in supporting Nepal to be a secure, stable and prosperous partner in the Indo-Pacific region, underpinned by stable, accountable and responsive government. Through the SNGP, launched in 2016, Australia became the first development partner to support Nepal's transition to federalism. Phase 1 of the program from 2017 to 2021 saw a $20 million investment in 7 municipalities across all provinces to support municipal plans, health governance, revenue implementation action plans, the development of legislation and parliamentary rules of procedure, community mediation, Sambad Samua, consumer protection and market monitoring, and subnational infrastructure financing. Building on the success of phase 1, we're in a bridging phase before the launch of phase 2, which will be worth $27 million through to 2026. Then, in cooperation with the Swiss government and IFAS, we are supporting She Leads, a partnership that is providing a leadership program for local government women with a focus on Dalit women in provinces 1 and 2. We're offering the expertise of our preeminent and world-recognised institutions such as CSIRO, eWater and ACR to support sustainable agricultural production and improved water resource management. We work through our trusted INGO and NGO partners to deliver around $6 million of support each year to all sectors in the farthest reaches of Nepal. And this includes an over 25-year collaboration with the Tilganga Institute of Ophthalmology through our ANCP, or Australian NGO Corporation partner, the Fred Hollows Foundation. Australia will never be among Nepal's largest international donors. It's just a straight reality due to our size. Our investments are typically small, targeted and by necessity adaptive to Nepal's changing needs. We also recognise that there are limits to what donor programs can deliver on their own. The private sector must have a role, And that's why we work through our business partnerships program to foster linkages between established businesses and smaller social enterprises to support innovation in climate resilience and livelihoods development. The Nepal government's own support for an enabling environment for business is key, and I believe that there is further work to be done in that regard. If there is any area of our bilateral relationship that I consider to be undercooked, it is the trade and investment relationship. Total merchandise trade in 2019 to 20 was $45 million, with Australia's exports to Nepal totaling $38 million and imports around $7 million. We exported services, principally education, to Nepal of around $3 billion and imported around $136 million in services. There are very few Australian investments in Nepal, but until the FDI regime and climate evolves, I don't see this changing significantly. As for Nepali investments in Australia, almost exclusively, this side of the business relationship has been taken on by Nepalis who have migrated to Australia. Australia has direct experience of the many fine qualities of Nepalis. The diaspora community is innovative, entrepreneurial, resilient, and embraces diversity in all its forms. Now, I'm a relative newcomer to the Australia-Nepal relationship. I've experienced it for less than a year out of its 61, but since my arrival in January, it's been abundantly clear to me that there is a deep connection between our people and an equally deep mutual desire to engage. And in 2021, we are conducting our strong friendship in an ever more complex, fragile, and fast-changing environment. Tensions over territorial claims in the Indo-Pacific are growing. Military modernisation is happening at an unprecedented rate. Democratic sovereign nations are being threatened and coerced by foreign interference. Cyber attacks are becoming more sophisticated, including from state-sponsored actors, and more frequent. Economic coercion is being employed as a tool of statecraft. Liberal rules and norms are under assault, and there is a great polarisation that our world is at risk of moving towards. The pandemic has accelerated and accentuated many of the strategic trends that have created this very real strain. The arrival of COVID, dramatic shifts in our region in countries such as Myanmar and Afghanistan, the fact that the Indo-Pacific has become the centre of strategic competition, all of these remind us of the importance of grounding bilateral relationships in mutual trust and respect. Australia values highly both its bilateral relationships and its network of international partnerships, including with the Quad, ASEAN, our Pacific family, and since September, AUKUS. Our key concern is to engage in all bilateral and regional partnerships in a way that bolsters collective efforts to meet the challenges in our region, to find rules-based solutions to tensions, and to ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains stable, secure, and prosperous, and free from coercion. Australia's connections to South Asia are deepening. Our diplomatic and trade connections with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives, for example, are growing rapidly. In 2020, Australia and India signed a comprehensive strategic partnership, and we have strengthened our technology partnership with India through the announcement this month of the establishment of a new Consulate General in Bengaluru and a Centre of Excellence for critical and emerging technology policy also to be based in India. These regional connections will offer new opportunities for and provide further ballast in the Nepal-Australia relationship. The regional challenges shared by Australia and Nepal include, obviously, climate change, health security, navigating an increasingly complex international environment of rapid technological change, threats to the rules-based order that was established to provide a voice for all, not just those who are economically and politically powerful. And all of these highlight the need for close bilateral engagement and coordinated international responses. Australia and Nepal, with our economies' shared reliance on tourism, trade, and the movement of people, appreciate this more than anyone. We both share policy challenges that will require careful navigation to deliver against community expectations. Is Australia impacted by climate change? Yes. Will Australia benefit from a transition to renewable energies and away from our reliance on coal? Yes. Does Nepal need electricity infrastructure to deliver on its energy needs and to meet its power purchase agreement obligations? Yes. Is the transmission infrastructure offered, for example, under the MCC in Nepal's national interest? I believe yes. Both our countries have vibrant Indigenous communities with their deep histories and rich cultures. Our Indigenous communities provide important reference points for who we are, where we have come from, and what it means to be Australian or Nepali. Neither of our countries are immune to corruption. In recent years, Australia has demonstrated its readiness to use the investigative powers of royal commissions and its anti-corruption agencies to shine a light on inappropriate and illegal behaviours. Former politicians have been jailed, companies have been fined. Accountability is critically important to our democracy, our prosperity, and to ensure that all Australians enjoy opportunities to advance themselves, their families, and their communities. And I think it is the same for Nepal. We share with Nepal the need for trade and investment. For many decades, Australia pursued policies that were protectionist and anti-competitive. We know from hard experiences that these policies do not work. We have embraced free trade and an enabling environment for foreign investment, and we've reaped the rewards. Free trade and investment are overwhelmingly good for Australia. International trade generates jobs for around 2.5 million Australians, or 1 in 5. Trade has meant that real income for the average Australian family is higher. Without steady inflows of foreign capital, our productive capacity, our employment levels, and our income would be significantly lower. Foreign direct investment supports 1.2 million jobs in Australia, or 1 in 10. So trade and investment has given our economy depth and resilience. It has stimulated growth and it has added to our prosperity. I believe that with the right policy settings and strong implementation, Nepal and its people will enjoy similar successes in terms of its economic growth. In conclusion, I would offer that in my diplomatic career, there has arguably never been a more challenging time to be a foreign policy practitioner. For formidable difficulties, such as the pandemic, have sparked a renewed appreciation among friendly nations for each other and what we can contribute to our partnerships and to our region. We have a greater appreciation for the values and goals that we share and what we can achieve by working together. Together, we carry the aspirations for the future, a region stable, a region prosperous, with healthy people and a clean environment. Australia looks forward to continuing its work with Nepal to achieve all of these goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you so much for your wonderful remarks. Still, we have a few minutes, so let me share a few questions. Like at the moment, what are the major priorities of Australian Embassy in Nepal? Can you please tell us about any future project and plan of the Australian Embassy in Nepal?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that for the time being, our focus on supporting Nepal's COVID response and also supporting any Australians who are in Nepal who are facing difficulties because of pandemic. This will continue to be a key overarching priority for us in the next year, and subject to what happens, for example, with the South African variant and future variants, this will continue to be a key priority for us. So we will continue to be working very actively through our development program in the health security area, in stability and in economic recovery. For example, I was at Bia Hospital just a couple of days ago to hand over equipment to a hospital that serves the most marginalised communities in Nepal. Looking forward, though, beyond the COVID response, because it's not always going to be about COVID, we are continuing to focus our efforts very much on subnational governance and supporting the transition to federalism. Likewise, we regard climate change as being a critical challenge, as I mentioned, facing Nepal, facing Australia, facing the world, that we need to continue to invest heavily in. So we will soon be starting up a new project with CSIRO and ICIMOD in the water management, water basin management space. And finally, I guess I'd like to mention that for me personally, I have a very strong focus on inclusion issues, social inclusion issues, and in particular the equality, gender equality and women's empowerment. So I would imagine that for the duration of my posting for another 2 years, you would continue to see me very active in the space of inclusion with a focus on gender equality.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellency, 2020 marked the 60th year anniversary of Nepal-Australia bilateral relations. Despite the decade-long connection, the trade data shows a huge trade deficit between the two countries. In your view, what should both the countries do to minimize the imbalances?
So I think there needs to be quite a lot of activity at several levels. I think that there needs to be more work at the government-to-government level. I would note that the Nepal Embassy in Canberra just in December, so roughly a year ago in December of last year, hosted an online trade and investment seminar to try to encourage more cooperation between our two countries in that space. We've also had visits by senior government officials in the trade space. But I think that, as I said, this is quite an undercooked area of the relationship. I think part of it has to do with a need for some changes in the regulatory environment. I think there are some informal and formal barriers to there being more trade between our countries. What I have seen is that the Nepali diaspora community in Australia is really active in this space, and I think that we need to harness their energy and their entrepreneurial activity to try and build new avenues to develop more exports from Nepal to Australia and to try and address that imbalance in the trading relationship.
Excellency, this is your 5th visit to Nepal. How has your stay in Nepal been like?
Honestly, Dr. Jaiswal, I love it. I was delighted to be offered the posting as ambassador to Nepal. As you've noted, I have been here 4 times previously. I first came here in 1985-86 as a 19-year-old arts law student. I was travelling around Asia backpacking, doing some volunteer work, and I spent a month in Nepal. Then I developed a deep love for the country, so I came back 3 more times as a tourist, including on my last trip. I did an overland trip from Tibet, where I had spent time in Lhasa. This is back in 1999. Did a Kora around Mount Kailash and then came overland into Kathmandu or into Nepal and spent time in Kathmandu on that trip. So I'm loving being back here. Nepal has changed in some fundamental ways, but in some really fundamental ways, it remains a deeply ancient, rich culture with extraordinarily diverse cultural practices that reflect traditions that are many, many hundreds of years old. So I've really appreciated acquainting myself more deeply with cultural practice here and festivals and learning more about the traditions here. But I've also enjoyed watching the transformation that Nepal has been going through and is going through. I think COVID has interrupted some of that work, and that takes us back to difficulties in progressing trade and investment. Without business people being able to travel, I think that has put a bit of a brake on transformation in that space. But I'm hopeful that things will shift again and open up, and that we will be able to develop further the bilateral relationship in those key elements.
Thank you, Excellency. We expect more 19-year-old future Australian ambassador to Nepal. Excellency, thank you so much for your wonderful remarks, and thank you once again for your valuable time. We wish to have you again in future, maybe in real at some other occasions. We'd also like to thank all our audience for their kind presence. Thank you so much. Excellency, have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.